often, depending on the season, not much wind, so that was a lot of rowing, especially all the way to the Middle East or the Levant or to Egypt. And you can get a taste of that if you go watch the old Ben-Hur movie again, where the galley slaves are being whipped, and the word of the commander was, "We keep you alive to serve the ship." Well, on this ship, we just have to eat to do our duty. So things have improved greatly. But the Venetian Empire continued all the way down the coast, down Ragusa is now where it's called Dubrovnik, now in the Croatian language. But you can see that the rest of Italy is not far away, but the Venetians were very much over on this side of the Adriatic, and then had their extending colonies that went out all the way through the Aegean and other places. But what this did is bring back so much commerce to this rather small city, and you can see one of the great galleons there docked near the Doge's palace. These paintings are actually fairly accurate. The surprising thing is it really looks the same nowadays, but photography is not quite as evocative sometimes as the old paintings, which you can see in the galleries here. Venice was the home of great painters like Titian and Tintoretto and various others that are acclaimed in the history of art. And there are many other depictions of all these different scenes in historical paintings. Some of them depict the great barge for the Doge. He would go on parade every year, and every year they'd have right off of that Punta del Dogano, they would have a ceremony blessed by the bishop that they do every year still, which is called the wedding of the sea and the city, where they have offerings into the ocean or into the sea right off of Venice to bless their annual pursuit out into the greater world. Oops, going the wrong way. Here we go. So we'll see a little bit of this. Though, again, since the invention of the engine, there's an awful lot of noisy traffic on the water, unlike the gentle rowing of the gondoliers. Now you can see those tips of the gondolas there. They actually are a symbol of the city with all the 7 districts, called the sestieri. And the curved top is evocative of the formal cap of the Doge. Well, Venice has always had a problem of the inland because being an island fortress city, they always wanted to have a little buffer state, and they were always fighting with the Lombardians or the Genovese and various other land powers to try to keep a hold. So sometimes they had larger estates, sometimes they didn't. They often had battles with the Vatican and the papal armies, because even though Venice was Catholic, it often ignored the orders from Rome, which is in a long and continuing story, perhaps. But that empire spread all the way to Crete, Cyprus, and the trading cities in the Levant, Acre and Tyre and others, and routes went all the way to the Black Sea. So this was really quite a tremendous stretch of influence all through this area. And they also led their fleets to be the departure point for the Crusades from the 12th century till the 14th century. So the first through the fourth Crusades were largely launched out of Venice, and then they, in the turmoil of it, they sacked many a city and brought back many a treasure, including the 4 horses of Piazza San Marco. The big bronze horses were originally in the Hippodrome, the Roman Colosseum of Constantinople, and they were brought back and put up on the Doge's palace. This is a procession from one of the events. Napoleon came and then took it all to Paris, and after a while they arranged to have it come back. Now the ones you'll see in the plaza are replica, because the original tremendous bronze statues of these 4 horses are indoors for display now, so they don't get weathered anymore. So this led to a life of ultimate pleasure and leisure, say, with Venice becoming a bit of a playground for the other European nobility to come. And they would, I read a tale about one of the local noble families. They would receive guests for an elaborate dinner in their palazzo, and the host would be dining off of golden knives and forks and such and golden plates, but at a certain point in the dinner would throw them out the window just to say, "Ha, I want a new plate." And the servants would come over and bring a new golden plate and new golden cutlery. But meanwhile, other servants were down under the window with a big net. Try that at home. But this is where, let's say, there was a great deal of indulgence in Venice, and all under the gaze of the Doge, who was when he was elected, he would be a job for life unless he was either particularly corrupt or particularly inept, in which case he had to become a monk and retreat to a monastery. But this meant that the political life of Venice was somewhat what I call a non-representative democracy of the nobility. The ordinary people could not vote at all, of course, and no women could be allowed in position of authority, but the doges sort of ruled over their town for decades at a time and became incredibly wealthy. And I came across another little ditty about there once was a doge of Venice whose fortune was rather endless. He spent all that he would and more if he could, but the incoming tide of his wealth was relentless. And so they were just dripping in furs and diamonds and such. But the one thing they would never do is go to sea for a cruise, because back in those days, going on a boat anywhere out to sea was not considered a holiday. So they stayed in their palaces and the world came to them. This is inside the Doge's palace at a reception hall, which is still there, you can see it. And all the gifts and wonders of the world were brought to them. Meanwhile, they sent out their professional military, often with mercenary soldiers from their empire, to go out and battle, especially the Ottoman Turks. And Sebastiano Venier was the commander-in-chief of the combined European naval forces that crucially defeated the Ottoman Turk fleet back in 1571. He became a great hero in all of Europe for having defended Christendom. But the most famous resident of this era in Venice was Marco Polo, which you may have heard. He was born in Corcula, where we were yesterday. He's the hometown favorite, but he moved to Venice, became a merchant, and then with his father and uncle went on their great journey around the world. Came back, and a book was published, which became the first best-selling travel book back in the 1292. And translated from many languages, and so it opened up the world via Venice, that you could travel all the way to China. Now, I took these pictures just yesterday at the Marco Polo Museum, if you stumbled upon it in the little corners of Corcula. But here is the great adventurer in his library, and then setting off to sea with his father and uncle, and leaving Venice behind, and they traveled all the way by land to China, then back by sea, with many an adventure all in the way. You can read all about it. But this was perhaps the crowning glory of Venice, is that they were able to express and then print and publish information about all the world. Prior to this journey and journal, they did not know much about the beyond. And now suddenly Europe was aware of the great extent of the world, and that also led to the other European powers trying to get around Venice to get to the trade routes, famously the Portuguese and then Columbus. But this was a little diorama there. What I like about this is, here is Marco Polo remembering his journey, but the rat in his cell. He was a prisoner of the Genovese when he did, but that rat is really a good listener. But anyway, finally Marco Polo was released from jail, and he went back to Venice, and he died a wealthy and esteemed man. But this led to the Venetians being the leading cartographers and eventually navigators, and driving the technology of the period. But this is a Venetian map by Fra Mauro, the monk named Mauro, who then drew this rather almost accurate view of the old world, including Africa. Now, no Europeans had been around the southern tip of Africa. They knew about parts of India and Asia and China and such, but the curious thing is, where did he get that information about circumnavigating Africa? Because this was before the Portuguese under Diaz had done it, or Vasco da Gama. And they think that it was because of Chinese traders that came all the way to Venice, or else the Arabs passed on this knowledge, and then it was put onto this map. And this, again, led to the European age of exploration around the world. But meanwhile, these doges were, let's say, rulers of their realm in a great ceremonial and proud manner. The name doge is the Venetian version of El Duce, the Duke. And of course, if you like sports, political sports, the Italian history is just full of colorful characters, including Garibaldi, who then set up the Republic of Italy, and Venice joined along with the other regions of Italy to make the modern nation, whereas it had previously been divided into separate kingdoms and the city-states of Venice and others. Then you had the rise of other El Duce, most terribly Mussolini. Nowadays you have a lot of turmoil even today. You can read about it in the paper, where there's this attraction to strong leaders and, let's say, authority, but then a underlying democracy which hopefully will preserve the peace and somewhat prosperity of Italy. So here you have Berlusconi and Savigny of the Five-Star Party, and so Italian politics to this day is full of these characters that we always wonder, how is this cartoon going to end? And so even today they've appointed a new Conte as the prime minister, but he's being told what to do, and it's almost as complicated as palace politics in Venice 500 years ago. But we'll see. Italy is used to having a fate and a drama above all. So here's Dante checking out the voting booths in hell, and here's an Italian artist's version of what really is happening with their country. It's being, as usual, hung by a string where they're not sure what or where or why it's going to work it out. But again, the Italian life goes on, and la dolce vita and such that the people don't worry themselves about it. In the politics of the economy, they may be trouble or in debt or all these things, but that does not interfere with the pleasures of life. And that's at its essence in Venice. And so this beautiful city is painted and photographed and in many people's dreams as they come here. But these days it is particularly famous for its art festivals and the Biennale, which has representatives from around the world. This is a Jeff Koons rather flamboyant version of a classical sculpture. And another thing that's going on right now, I kind of grabbed these pictures out of a newspaper article, is a Vatican-sponsored architectural competition to make new sacred meditative chapels. And so there's, on one of the outer islands, there's a whole area where they had architects come and build new spiritual architecture. So that's on display right now in this island off of the main city. So this is where the spirit goes on, and we have new forms for what are very ancient spiritual longings of our species here. This one is particularly lovely, but they're all just models, and they may actually be built somewhere around the world. Again, this is sponsored by the Vatican. So Venice has this both ancient and modern confluence, which has been quite difficult. Just the fact of getting on and off the island and providing services for so many visitors. Now there is a tram that goes on the causeway over to the mainland, and there are all these commuters that often commute 2 hours each way to get to their job in the historic center. And so to provide transport has always been a challenge. This is the train station, but the joy of Venice, you can take a boat to get to the bus station, to the train station, or even to the airport. But we are in this situation where the big cruise ships come in into the Canal Giudecca. They float by, and Elda was telling me they used to have announcements on the ship. You could hear, oh, this is this. And the city of Venice banned any outdoor announcements or any horns from these ships because it would, rattle all the old windows. And the local people formed a group called the No Grandi Navi, they call it, to limit the size of the ships. Now, ships have been coming in here for 1,000 years or so, and this is an old P&O ship that would come down. But back in those days, the ships weren't so large, so now we're going to be actually docking here on north side of the whole island in the great cruise terminal. The city of Venice had a referendum and they voted to limit the size of any ships coming in to 40,000 tons. So no ship bigger than this would be allowed into Venice at all. It was, of course, lobbied against by the cruise industry and by other economic forces, and it was overruled in a court hearing. But nonetheless, some of the mega ships, what I call the monsters of the seas, have just decided not to come in anymore because the logistics are just too difficult. There's no room at the dock. These ships with 4,000 or 5,000 guests on it are just overwhelming. And the Venetians are very resentful of the volume of people that get off for the day. They call them the eat and flee. They don't stay in a hotel. They just buy a few things and go back to the ship, sail away. We're part of that. But here's the airport, which is, again, you can get a Vaporotti right to the airport, one of the few airports you can go by water to get to. And the other problem about Venice is this ancient jewel of a city is threatened by rising seas, and Piazza San Marco regularly floods during the spring tides. And there, 1966, there was a terrible flood that destroyed and damaged many places in Venice. But this is a constant threat. They expect the seas to rise almost a meter by the next 50 years or so, which would then put many parts of the city permanently underwater. So therefore, they've had a project called the MOSE, the Modello Sperimentale Electromeccanico, which is an abbreviation for a flotation devices that we can see as we go in. There's construction sites on either side of the outer entrance past the Lido into the city, where they would be at a high tide or a severe storm, they would automatically float and block off the channels and therefore prevent flooding of Venice. But this has already cost billions of euros and is supposed to be open next month, supposedly. They're about to have some inauguration of it. It's not much to see because these are submerged caissons that would come up only when needed. And so they're not going to block the traffic or be an eyesore, let's say. This is a problem around the world. They're thinking of doing the same thing in New York. They have the Thames barrier for London, and this is a global problem, let's say. But hopefully it will be solved, or else it won't create such a problem as it already has, though. But Venice is rightfully concerned about its future. But meanwhile, it's a beautiful place, and it's still one of the remarkable experiences to come and see it. And as far as this beautiful journey around Italy and, of course, to Corfu and Croatia and such, I remember the saying of Susan Sontag, who said, "I want to go everywhere because it's on my list." Or the other saying from Disraeli was, "I saw more than I can remember, but I also remember more than I saw." So this kind of travel is an education and a delight, and particularly for Venice, it's a great pleasure to be here. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you, David, for fixing. Oh, back to my family pictures. Oh, well, excuse me. Thank you very much, and have a great time in Venice.